IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. Today we have a fascinating conversation lined up for you. We talk about privacy of users going forward into the age of the internet and also the rise and constant evolution of digital ad markets. I am joined with Pratik, who also works at the Takshashila Institution. But before we go into this conversation, I would just like to add that if you enjoy listening to All Things Policy, consider signing up to our courses. The applications are open now. You can find out more about the courses at takshashila.org.in/courses. All right. Having said that, Pratik, welcome to this conversation.
Thanks, Ron. I like how you've called it fascinating before we even had it.
I mean, no pressure. And I think this is a ripe time to talk about how the ad markets are evolving, the cookie apocalypse, and also what privacy has to do with all of this. And I think there's a few articles that I would like to get into, which we will link to the show notes. But I think the first one sort of is a good segue into what we're going to talk about. It's Google and the age of the privacy theater, and of course, technology theater and privacy theaters is stuff that you talk about in Tashida's courses, and it's something that Wired has also been talking about recently. Because Chrome is the most popular browser in the world. It has 60% of market share, and Safari, Firefox, and Edge are others. And Google has recently been sort of trying to pivot to a new model of online advertising that doesn't actually use third-party cookies. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so if you recall, this is something we covered in a recent episode, right? Which is the federated learning of cohorts. So it's part of a program that they've been rolling out called the Privacy Sandbox, and they're trying a bunch of different measures or different approaches to how you can do targeted advertising without compromising on users' privacy. And one of them was the federated learning of cohorts or flock, right? And that's something that we had covered pretty recently. And the idea behind this is that, look, they have Chrome, which is the largest browser, in terms of market share. And instead of targeting based on individuals, they will try to group users into cohorts, as the name suggests, and then try to target ads that way. This has created a little bit of kerfuffle in the digital ad market space, because they have also simultaneously announced that they will not be supporting any alternatives to third-party cookies, right? To that, in a sense, the entire industry is dependent on. So on the other side, you have various advertisers and ad networks trying to build their own alternative. Right? It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. Google has rolled out a pilot of this, which is, interestingly enough, it may not roll out in Europe because it may or may not be GDPR compliant. That's kind of amazing how they got to this state without realizing that GDPR could be an issue. But nevertheless, it's created an interesting dynamic in the digital ad market, which is very, in a sense, dominated by two companies, right? Google and Facebook. Between them, they account for a huge chunk of the revenue and the profits in the market. In fact, if you remove them, you'll probably get that the market is shrinking year on year.
That's quite fascinating, and sort of brings me to the second part of what the article was talking about. So the Wired article has sort of called this as an example of privacy theater, which means that while this thing is being marketed as a step forward for consumer privacy, it actually does very little to change the underlying dynamics of an industry built on surveillance-based behavioral advertising. And you tell me a little bit more about why this move is an example of privacy theater, and is the flock-based model actually a little bit better than the third-party cookie model that existed before?
Yeah, so good question. So the flock-based model versus the cookie-based model, I think there are trade-offs in each approach. I think we covered that in our last episode, so I won't rehash that. We can probably link in the show notes to that previous episode and a bunch of articles that we had referenced as well. Right? But the privacy theater aspect is very interesting, because, as you pointed out, that this ostensibly is a move to protect user privacy, but does it actually do that, right? And there's also a pattern of this sort of behavior, and not just Google, even Facebook, right? In terms of announcing new moves that externally seem like they're taken with the point of view of user privacy in mind. But if you look at internally how some of these companies benefit from them, or how they continue to use that data which they are denying access to others, right? And they continue their own profiling exercises. It sort of gives you a different lens to look at it, right? There is an example of this is precisely in the digital ad market, right? Google does restrict a lot of the data and the type of cookies and the sharing of IDs across other participants in the marketplace. But as Google, which operates an ad exchange itself, an ad server itself, as well as tools that publishers use to auction their inventory, etc. Right? Google controls all of that. And it is able to profile users across all the entire life cycle and use that data for itself. But different other players in the market are not able to do that, right? Now you can argue on the one hand that yes, that if you're looking at privacy, that's an outcome that favors privacy, but it's also a little two-faced in the sense of from some of these corporations, because they are denying access to that information to others while using it for themselves. And then there is I think there is scope for, this is what people try to do, they're trying to define whether establish whether there's an anti-competitive angle in this sort of behavior.
That's actually quite I don't know. The way I would encapsulate this is that if you compare this to what Chrome does now, you could maybe say it's a little better, but in my very humble opinion, I would say that more likely it is just worse in a different way. And I say that because I feel like first party on the internet is Google itself. Right? So between searching on Google, watching videos on YouTube, using Android phones, being logged into Gmail or Google Drive, or indeed to just Chrome, users give Google a tremendous amount of data directly. And the privacy sandbox sort of leaves all that undisturbed, which is, I don't know. I mean, yes, you're blocking third party cookies and you're sort of consolidating more power to Chrome and in Google, and the rest of the internet doesn't sort of give you a lot. Which sort of brings me to this argument we were having before the podcast began. It was about whether more competition in the ad markets is a good thing. And I think you have a very interesting viewpoint. And I think the article you were reading rather had a more interesting viewpoint. Do you want to elaborate about that?
Yeah, so that's so just to clarify, it was an article. It was a Zoom webinar with a number of antitrust practitioners, including there was Dina Srinivasan, there was Mark Lemley, and there was a third gentleman whose name I unfortunately don't recall. But this was looking at a lot of these things from an antitrust perspective, and the conversation was around the aspect of, hey, will antitrust address the desired outcomes if what you're trying to do is solve for privacy in the digital ad market, right? And I thought that's a very interesting take, because the argument being made was that, look, a more competitive, so we can we can make the case, you can potentially make the case that Google dominates the digital ad ecosystem and the entire marketplace, and that a number of their practices can sort of be positioned as being anti-competitive. And Dina Srinivasan has actually written a paper on that. We can link to that. But just to take it further from there, right? Will increased competition in this space necessarily lead to better privacy outcomes? I think that's a big question mark, right? It's not a guarantee that just because if you're forcing Google to share more data with others, or if you're preventing it, depending on how you implement this, right? If you're forcing them to share data with others or give everyone fair access to data versus preventing them from using this data on their own, it can have different outcomes, right? And in a more competitive marketplace, you could just have other ways of targeting people, which may be more intrusive, which may not be more intrusive, right? So it in the sense that if your end goal is to improve privacy, then just having a more competitive digital ad marketplace may not be sufficient, right? You can argue that maybe a necessary condition. It is unlikely to be a sufficient condition, because once that competitive marketplace is there, we don't know what form it will take. And I think you have a slightly different view on this.
Well, so my basic argument to that is that, Okay, so the argument being made here is that if you have more competition, that would lead to worse privacy practices. In a nutshell, I think I've lost some nuance when I said that, but I think that's the gist of the argument because you might have.
I think it could lead to worse. It's not that it will, it could right now.
Sure, yeah, but my sort of counter to that is that the market has clearly signaled time and again that if you have better privacy practices, that will be valued by users and also to some extent by advertisers. It's sort of why Safari as a browser or Firefox as a browser have such unique selling points and that sort of have stood the test of time. And I just feel like if you had sort of more competitive marketplace, I think people would automatically strive towards alternatives that have more privacy. And so hence that's why I don't think the end goal, as to say, is as aligned with the argument that the other paper is making.
No, so I mean, I think there are it potentially a lot more nuance, right? Because look, while Safari and Firefox have their niche, Chrome is by far the more dominant browser, right? So we don't necessarily know which way people will choose, right? And there is this there is a difference between what people say about privacy and how they ultimately act, right? There is a demonstrated difference in that. So it's not a given that the more privacy centric solution will win out in the market, right? And I think and that's the gist of the point that he's making, that if you want to solve for just if you want to solve for privacy and the business model, right? Which if you believe that the surveillance based business model is incorrect and is the source of many problems, then just having a more competitive digital ad marketplace is not going to solve that, right? That it's not going to make that business model go away. You need other types of regulation for that. And I think that was the limited point that the speaker was trying to make in that case.
And speaking of comparative markets, I think this is also a quite nice segue into this other sort of reading that I was doing for this podcast, which is why privacy is an antitrust issue. And I think the gist of this is that, for example, Facebook has used its monopoly power to degrade the quality of its service below what a competitive marketplace would allow. So I think there's also the argument that Facebook initially locked in users with promises to protect their data and privacy, only to break those promises once competitors were eliminated. And when users today sign up for Facebook, they agreed to allow the company to track their activity across more than 8 million websites and mobile applications that are connected to the internet. And they can't opt out of this. And so that sort of brings me to monopolies, which is that generally when you talk about monopolies, you sort of have this test called the SNP test. It's a small but significant increase in price where the alleged monopolist can have a sort of increase the price by a little bit and not see demand suffer. And to me, this is interesting to see if you can apply this price thing to the quality of service argument and say that can you sort of significantly sort of degrade the quality of service and not have demand affected. And the other thing sort of here is that you might degrade the quality of service, but is privacy actually like neatly fitting into that? Like it just seems like trying to fit, I don't know, a round peg into a square hole times two and seeing if this thing comes out fine. Do you have
No, so
Yeah.
yeah, so this actually, again, this is from another Dina Srinivasan paper on how to regulate Facebook, right? And on the premise that look, and since it's a zero price market, she bases the argument that it's not, you can't base it on price, so it has to be based on quality, right? And she's using privacy on that front, and she does through the paper apply the not exactly the SNP test, but she defines the relevant market place as social media platforms, right? She gives her reasons for doing that, then talks through how Facebook has degraded its privacy practices over the years, and the fact that it has not led to a reduction in its market share, both in terms of Google, Facebook, and Instagram for the US, right? And then uses that to make the argument that there isn't necessarily a substitute, right? In the way that the SNP test sort of runs. So she does sort of stick to that and makes that case. It's an interesting paper. It's a long paper, but it is a it's an interesting read, and I guess a different dimension to look at this Facebook's dominance, right? And whether you can use privacy as an indicator of quality to make the case, right? And then it's a question of, okay, look, Facebook has the largest market share. You potentially can argue that it is dominant. Then the question is that has it reached there by unfair means, right? Because that is, I think, what the antitrust principle is, specifically in the US, also looks for, right? And there the case is that they have made, they've shifted goals on their privacy commitment over the years, and she documents examples of that, including I think a failed attempt in 2007, 2008, where they wanted to track, what people were doing on different websites and post it on their newsfeed, right? And at that time, it was just limited to those websites. It was not the same surveillance thing that rolled out years later. But even then, that was met with backlash, and they had to roll it back, right? And the timing of this just so happens that around these times you still had other options in other significantly volume social networks out there, right? It was only in 2014 that even Orkut, if anyone remembers them, Google decided it would be shutting down Orkut, and then he makes the case that some of their privacy degrading practices have since then gone unchallenged, right? Because there isn't necessarily an alternative in the same niche right now. And this is where it gets interesting, because you can make the case that look, there are new social networks coming up, right? TikTok is a good example, right? Snapchat as well, a little before that. So there are other social networks that are finding reasonably solid footing in the marketplace. Whether they are alternatives or just adjacent, I think that's still an open question.
Well, I think regular listeners to this podcast know that we do remember Orkut quite fondly, and the scraps that we.
I actually a few years ago found my Orkut profile and I was horrified, and I immediately went and deleted it.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that once you grow out of it, you just try to make sure it in your head never happened.
Yeah.
And there are memories that I would most definitely not want to share on this podcast of me being on Orkut. So yeah, but I think generally we are at I don't know, at a weird place according to me when it comes to privacy and antitrust. And I mean, I think Deena Srinivasan does make this argument that you so beautifully laid out. I don't sort of completely agree with it, but hard to see where we'll go from here. Do you? I think we should sort of talk about what happens going forward. So, can we sort of have your thoughts on where do we go from here as far as antitrust is concerned? How are these digital markets going to evolve? And yeah, over the next 5 years, what is the internet going to look like? Considering so much regulation is also coming in.
Yeah, that's not an easy question to answer at all. Uh, yeah, so we are certainly seeing increased action on the antitrust front, right? And it's not just in the US. We're seeing even in Australia, their competition authority has studied specifically Google and Facebook in a very detailed manner over the last couple of years, and we're now seeing the outcomes of that. One was the media bargaining code, which both of us did not necessarily agree with, right? But I expect we'll see more from Australia, because they've also put out reports on Facebook's position in digital advertising, etc. So there is going to be a lot of action on the antitrust front in the next coming years, in the next few years. I think what we need to be watchful for is whether it's going to drive to the outcomes we're looking for, or are we just hoping that it will, right? And I think that's where this gets really tricky, right? And which is where I thought that example of, hey, will a more competitive digital advertising marketplace automatically lead to better privacy outcomes? That's why I think that question is very important, right? Now you can have different views or outcomes or opinions on that, but I think just the principle that are we looking at this to solve something that it may not be able to, because it's a tool that we have, right? I think that's very important. I think the positive, of course, is that it's very unlikely that antitrust is the only thing we use. Right? There's going to be simultaneously a lot of different things that different countries around the world try. So it's not that we're only going to go in with one hammer. I guess in this case, of course, the question is whether the other hammers will also drive the outcomes that we want and whether they'll be wielded in the same way. No Thor reference.
Thank you for that. I think fairly unusual ending in all this policy. And it's been a pleasure. Let's see how these things develop.
All right, thanks.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We'd like to thank our sponsors on the network this week, Sierra Tires and TheWholeTruthFoods.com. Thank you for your support. We did a bunch of cock and bulls this week. We had guests like Ayushi Amin and Puneet Mania for that. Besides that, Vasanti Hariprakash was on, as well as Jay Alani, a paranormal investigator. Really, really great week on Cyrus Says. Do check it out. Tune into This Round is on Me for an episode recorded from Gulmarg featuring one of India's professional alpine skiers, Arif Khan, who's looking forward to representing India at the Beijing Olympics. On The Habit Coach, Ashton has a chat with Kunal Rajput, a popular fitness trainer who recently completed 7 rounds of his Unlock workout series. The reunified, simplified gang of Tony, Naren, Chuck, and Srikat discussed NFTs on the latest episode. On The Millennial Athlete, Tanvi and Shlok looked back at all the England championships of the year so far and discussed the interesting highlights of the same. Also on Thale Harate, our Kannada podcast, Ganesh spoke to Archana Shyam of Antharanga Theatre in the latest episode. And on Kadai podcast, our Tamil show, Kavita Jiva shed light in another story about the bravery and excellence in the governance of the Pallava dynasty. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
Hi, I'm Zarina Poonawalla, host of the Empowering Series podcast on the IVM network. I happen to be a peak performance coach and leadership coach by profession, and I'm here to share with you productivity tools, life-altering techniques, and real-life hacks to help you achieve your maximum potential in everything you do, your relationships, professions, careers. So tune in every Monday to unleash your inner power. Be safe, be well, be empowered.